Welcome, Sarah. I am really delighted to have you here today. I want to introduce my audience to you because they may never have come across your incredible work. And I first came across Sarah because she's written this book called The Cold Fix. And anybody who knows me and my work will know that I also have a great passion for cold water, although Sarah's passion for it pales mine into insignificance. So Sarah's an author living and working in the Lake District, the most beautiful part of the UK, and she spends her time writing about the landscape around her and about her journey with cold exposure and how that has impacted and continues to impact her life. In 2017, Sarah had to have major surgery, and this caused you, I'll say you now, to really reflect on your physical future and brought about this refocusing, if you like, on the things that you can do rather than the things you couldn't do. So, for our audience, let's backtrack a bit to the beginning of your journey and again reiterating this warm welcome, Sarah.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here. Yes, in February 2017, I had to have some major surgery on my legs. And the consultant suggested I have both legs operated on at once, but he warned me it would be a difficult recovery and I would need to be completely non-weight bearing for 8 weeks. So it was called osteotomy. I had osteoarthritis in my inner knee joints very severely. So at that point, I was hardly walking. I was with a walking stick and bow-legged and in constant pain. So it seemed a good idea at the time. And I thought, yes, if I have them both done at once, okay, it's more serious, but at least I'll get the recovery over and done with more quickly. It's taken me 5 years to learn to walk again, really. And I think part of that is because I didn't have any physiotherapy afterwards. So I was either in bed or sitting in my wheelchair for 8 weeks with no physio. And all they'd said to me was just bend and flex your legs. They didn't. So I actually, I think, wasted away, my bum and my legs. And I previously had really strong glutes and legs from cycling and running, and it just wasted away. And then having to reprogram the nerve passageway down from brain to leg to feet, it just took forever. Nerves take forever to heal. So I did actually start having some sports therapy that a friend of mine came over to my house and she helped me with trigger pointing and fascia release. And she actually said, I think you need to run, because I think if you could run, you would be able to walk. And it didn't seem right to me, but I now know what she meant. I had to train my legs to pick up again. So I used to try and run up and down the garden for her.
Wow.
But it took forever, absolutely forever. And I guess it wasn't until lockdown when I did the Couch to 5K, which is very gentle introduction to running, a reintroduction to running, I should say. And yeah, I started to notice a difference in my legs and generally felt more bouncy, I suppose, and more as if, I could actually be up in those mountains again one day, full of hope that
Wow.
things were improving. But that's a long time. That's 3 years before I really felt.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds incredible that firstly that you didn't have any physiotherapy. Was that because it wasn't offered to you?
It wasn't offered. I didn't realize I needed it, which sounds silly. I was shown how to use a banana board to get from bed to wheelchair to commode over the toilet and things like that. Life became very simple in some ways, right back to basics. And it wasn't until I got sciatica, because I was sitting for so long, that again I spoke to a physio who's a friend of mine, and she was stunned that I hadn't had any on leaving the hospital. And so she helped me do some exercises at home that would help relieve the sciatica, and it did. And then I had to refer myself to have physio here locally. See, I couldn't drive for a long time, so therefore I couldn't get myself anywhere, and physios don't come to you. So I was very much looking after myself. My 81-year-old mum came and looked after me, and my 13-year-old son. So that's the support I had at that time. My daughter came and stayed as well a bit. So yeah, it was very, very dark times.
Yeah, I mean, that's what really strikes me when I listen to this story. Like that was going to be my next question, kind of, I don't know whether what you experienced in your legs was unexpected or something that you'd been aware of over time, but the enormous impact post-surgery on your mental health is evident.
Mm.
Did you know what was coming, or was this something that came completely out of the blue?
I didn't actually know what was coming. I had been, I'd say, almost obsessive cycling and running, and I never did very well in sporties, but I used to enter them. So I had things to put on the calendar to be aiming for. And I used to do things like cycle up the Col de Tourmalet and Mont Ventoux I did on my own. And I was just so thrilled that I was that fit. And then I had a prolapse disc, which I thought maybe this is a hint that I should slow down a bit. But I recovered from it. But it left my right leg a bit numb.
Right.
Because the sciatic nerve had actually been dug into, so it was partially damaged. But then I managed to sort of cycle a bit, run a bit. I didn't ever have any injuries. But then my knees, my legs were so painful all the time, and I thought it was the result of the prolapse disc. Then I decided to have that investigated because the pain just was getting worse and worse and worse.
Right.
And I was shocked to know that it was severe at that point. I must have a high pain threshold.
I was just thinking that. Yeah.
Because to go from not knowing, nothing wrong with my knees particularly, to having severe, and he showed me the x-ray, no cartilage left at all been eaten away by the osteoarthritis, and the bones had been rubbing against each other and they were grooved out where they'd rubbed against each other. So I really don't know how. And I used to lie on the sofa at night with my legs akimbo, which kind of releases the nerves, the knees from touching on each other, the bones from touching. And I just took ibuprofen and paracetamol. I had no idea what was going on. I really didn't.
Wow. I mean, I wonder if some of that high pain threshold had come from that capacity to endure in your sports, in your cycling, in your racing, because we're raising our tolerance, because we're adapting to extreme circumstances. I know now that you do that in a different way. We're going to come to that. But so you had your surgery, you weren't getting any kind of physiotherapy, and you talked about these being dark times, which I'm not surprised about. And that sounds like it coincided with lockdown. Who did you become in that time before lockdown?
Yeah.
Okay.
So yes, it was 2017, and then
So
lockdown was 19, wasn't it?
that's right. Yeah.
Years before, where I was walking, but it wasn't without pain. And, I was walking strangely. I was more shuffling, I guess. And I didn't really manage long walks in the mountains anymore, or tricky ones. They were very much park up at the lake, get down to the beach and swim.
Right. Right. And so I mean, the horrible irony of going through something like that and being in that dark space and then hitting lockdown. Well, on the one hand, everybody is isolated and everybody's on their own, but can you talk about the impact on your mental health a little bit more around the times when you were in that recovery and the times when you'd had your surgery and you realized what was happening in your body?
I felt um, worthless, I have to say. I don't think I've ever had a really high self-esteem. It's just, I don't think it's ever been instilled in me as a child. Not bad parenting, just it wasn't something, we didn't shout about things we'd achieved. It just wasn't really done. And even with like the round robin letter that my mum used to do with relatives, it wasn't, none of us did anything amazing that she could shout about, and I certainly didn't. I remember her saying, what can I write about Sarah? What's she done? Because I kind of took a different route to my sisters. They were scientific, doctor and a nurse, but she couldn't ever quite find the word to describe me, because I did a secretarial course. I went into publishing right at the bottom, editorial secretary, then assistant. And I always wanted to write, but I was never quite in a box. She couldn't categorize me. I was always a bit unconventional. So I never got that validation, if you like. And maybe that's part of why I used to push myself, because I was trying to seek validation, I guess. I don't know. So I felt pretty worthless at that point, because my validation had been being able to cycle up these big mountain passes, and be able to get up at 5 a.m, cycle 50 miles, get home for breakfast, get the kids on the bus to school and so on. That was my validation. When that was taken away because of this, well, the osteoarthritis, and then the fact I was not getting the results I'd been promised, I just thought, well, what am I? You know, what is my role now? I never ever felt suicidal. I think I have my mum and kids to thank for that. You know, I knew I was loved, and I knew I was wanted, but I kind of didn't want myself, and I didn't want who I was potentially going to be for the rest of my life, because I'd never ever not been able to be outside and be active. So I had to completely rethink and reset who am I, and who am I now going to be? What can I be? And that's where the what can I do, focus on that rather than what I'm no longer able to do. And you know, skipping a bit, I am now able to do quite a lot of the things I used to do. I can't cycle to anywhere near the extent, or run, but there's lots of other things I can do. So I've never got it back. I've never got that person back again. And in some ways, I'm really grateful.
I was just going to ask you about that. Yeah, because what?
Because I think I was a bit over obsessive, and I think I missed out on quite a lot of just mum and kids time. You know, what, maybe sitting watching a film with them. You know, I spent a lot of time working out what was going to be my next challenge. They weren't that interested. I've been a good mum, and they have had a lot of my time, because being freelance, I've been able to be, you know, home when they get home from school, and, you know, always there for them. But whether I was always there for them or dreaming of my next challenge, I think that's a question I've asked myself a lot.
Yeah, I really hear you. I mean, I think that's one of the challenges of being a parent, which is juggling our personal identity, dreams, and desires with that of the role of parenting, and doing a good job with that. And I'm sure you're like me, you know, we've had to forgive ourselves our shortcomings, because in that we can also forgive our parents their shortcomings, can't we? You know, you talked about your mum and the letter, and that really moved me. I used to live with a woman when I was a student, and her mum did a round robin letter, you know, and I was touched by that, because of course in these times we don't tend to write as much and send letters. But just, you know, to be that unconventional one that people can't categorize, and then to still keep finding, where is my creative outlet? And really understanding when I hear you say that, just how challenging that loss of identity must have been, alongside the physical challenges that you were facing. So I kind of want to skip forward a bit to cold exposure and cold water swimming, wild swimming. Was that accidental, that discovery? Was it intentional? How did you come across it?
I came across it in April 2017. My kids decided that it was time we got outside. They would drive me, we'd go down to Cromwell Water and have a picnic. And they suggested we could have a dip or a swim in the lake, because it's something that we've always done and I've done with them, is go on picnics to nice places and sit by a river, build a dam, you know, paddle, whatever. So it was completely natural suggestion to do that. So they took their wetsuits, I didn't take mine. Still on crutches, partially weight bearing at that time. And then I got in the water and I just realized that, wow, I can just float here. I can't even feel my legs. I guess the water must have been, I don't know, 10, 11, 12 degrees, so cold, but, you know, not ice cold. And I swam with them for a bit and realized that I could see the mountains. I was outdoors again. I could hear all the sounds. I could smell the water. All my senses just came alive again. Because when I was stuck indoors, I just felt like a trapped animal. I need to be outdoors. That stimulation of the light and color and everything. So I thought, ooh, this is something I could do. This could be my way back to being physical outdoors. So that was the moment that I kind of decided this is what I want to try and do more of.
And you've not gone about it by halves. So I'd really like to follow that thread and follow that segue. There's this moment where you feel all of your senses coming alive, where you're back outdoors doing what you love. But what shifted perhaps in your brain, in your mind, in your body to take you into going, actually, I don't just experience these remembrances of who I was in my relationship with the outdoors, but I'm feeling really good doing this, and I'm going to do it intentionally and more often. What was that pathway?
It started with swimming with friends locally, and then we wanted to enter a winter swimming championships, and we were told, oh, if you do that, you need to be swimming 4 times a week at least. So we did. And we felt very proud of ourselves. And then the event was cancelled, but we carried on swimming. And then so I was meeting more and more people within the swimming community and realizing that it was giving me friendships, it was giving me social stimulus that I needed, very much needed. And I started using Facebook to share my writing about a swim. And I realized that I didn't just want to write, got up early, went for a swim, it was nice. I actually made a story of it because I've always liked telling stories, and the photos and everything. And I realized that my creative juices were starting to flow along with this desire to be outdoors and in the water more often. Then we had lockdown, and I had to go on my own, obviously, we all did, but I used to cycle into the national park. It's 8 miles away to get to Cromwell. So I would cycle, and I would cycle at dawn, and just sit in the water and just listen to the cuckoos. And it was a beautiful summer, that first lockdown.
I remember, yeah.
And I was just with my son. So I'd go off early in the morning while he was still sleeping. Then I'd come back, and we had a great time, actually, to be honest, because I knew that for once everybody else was lonely. It wasn't just me. And I actually found it less lonely because my son was at home. He couldn't do his GCSEs. My daughter was not working. My mum was, everybody was trying to look after her because she was on her own in a 1-bedroom flat. So she didn't see anybody for 3 or 4 months, I think it was. And there was a lot of activity. Everybody went digital, which I don't actually condone. I'm glad we're all seeing each other in real life again. But there was that community spirit. There was that, we're going to get through this together. And I felt part of something bigger. But I did have to do a lot of it on my own. So that increased my sense of bravery. And then I was still writing. And as we came out of lockdown, I had been using Instagram particularly as a way of communicating with other people who were swimming and in other countries, because the world suddenly became a small place, although none of us could go anywhere. And I could see people in these really beautiful cold places, and I was learning more and more about how the water can, lift you and change you and have an impact on you. And I was writing more and more because I was doing long stories. I learned how to use reels on Instagram. So I could tell a visual and semantic story.
Yeah.
So it all just, I think it was, it evolved. It was organic how I was drawn to it. And then after lockdown, I submitted my manuscript again to the same publishers, and it was accepted. So then I started to piece together who I was going to go and interview. And my question to them was, what is it about the cold that you love? Not what is it about the water, because I'd realized that it isn't the water as such, it's the temperature, it's the cold. The cold does something to you. So that was the question I wanted to know. And there's a lot more to it than that, but that's the basic kernel.
Wow. I mean, I want to ask you now, because you've talked about learning to use Instagram and connecting with people and that social element that I really saw within my work as well at that time. What do you want from using Instagram going forward?
Really, there's 2 things about it, 3 things. It's an author platform because I have always wanted to be a published author, and my intention is to carry on and keep writing, and it's well received, and I want to continue to provide that for people. So it's an author platform. It's an outlet for my experimenting with taking photos, videos, experimenting with IT. It makes me write every day. It makes me think every day about what I want to say. And I've made a lot of friends through it and then met them in real life. And I intentionally tried to meet people in real life and not just keep it all, online.
Yeah. I mean, you did a challenge not that long ago, didn't you, where you invited people to meet you in places to go for cold dips. How was that?
That was and I've just done my 59th person today. So it was to swim with 60 different people in 60 different places in my 60th year, because I really did not want to turn 60. I think at the beginning of every new decade, it's just like, oh no, I don't want this. But you can't do that. Just have to go forward. So I thought this will be one way of making sure it's a year to remember. And 60 different people is quite a lot, 5 a month. And it's been tricky because I've made my own rules. So it has to be a different place. It can be the same lake, but a different access point, I decided.
Yeah.
And not all of them have been human, I have to say. They haven't been human. I swam with a dog at one point while I was jumping in the river with the dog. The owner was swimming and I said to her, do you mind if I jump in with your dog? Will he come jump in with me? And he did. He was beautiful. I included him. And then there was an inflatable flamingo in a river in Spain. And I went up to these kids who were messing about with the flamingo and I said, could I please, oh, actually it was a swan, could I please sit on your, because I've never sat on one and I don't speak Spanish, but you know, I managed to show them what I wanted to do. And I've got a lovely video of me being shoved onto this inflatable swan because it's impossible to get on one, and then holding its face and nodding across the river. So that's one. And they're little nuggets of memory that are really lovely to treasure. And it's been a challenge. And I guess I'm stereotypical. I like to challenge myself. And if I can't do it by cycling up a col, I'll find another way to do it. I'm a bit like water. I will find a way.
Wow, you know, I hope that adventure has lessened the impact of your turning 60.
It has, yes.
Yeah, good. What do you feel when you get in the water and get cold?
I feel lots of things. I feel relieved that I've got in it again. Sometimes if you're feeling very stressed and anxious, you know, just sort of your brain's whizzing around and you get in the water and then, you know, all you've got to do is just sit there and the water will do the work. That's nice. It's brain switch off time.
Why do you think it switches off your brain?
Why do I think it does?
Yeah.
Because you have to focus. Because when it's cold, particularly, you're at a certain point, you're less aware of what's going on around you, and you go right into yourself because you're really focusing on your breathing and how everything feels, what you're sitting on, making sure you're not in the current, you know, and everything like that. And your world becomes really tiny. And suddenly, and it's like a lot of other things, it's like rock climbing, you are so focused on, can that tiny little piece, is that going to hold my whole weight? And everything goes in like this. And so all the noise in your head just is off.
Yeah, that's certainly been my experience of coming into cold exposure. And I want to come back to yours, but I want to share a little piece of mine because I've always been somebody, and I share this because I think our listeners might relate to both of our experiences of cold exposure. I've always been somebody who's hated being cold. You know, I sleep with hot water bottles a lot of the year, particularly since menopause. I like coziness, I like warmth, I like comfort. And then last winter, I found myself in Portugal. I'd gone away with a friend and we were staying in this wild piece of land where there was a river running through it. And we would walk down the hill to the river. I started to realize how out of shape I was because I've always had stamina, but that's not the same as being really in shape, you know, in good health. And we'd walk down, I'd get breathless, and my friend, who's always been into wild swimming, would get in the water and I'd be like, oh, no, that's not for me. And I started doing it with her a few times. And the first few times, I'm not going to lie, I experienced so much resistance and so much mental chatter about just getting in, and I was contracting into it and feeling uncomfortable. And then one day I suddenly saw that playing out and went, well, you're making this 10 times worse because your mind is so resistant and yours. So just walk in, breathe, slow down. And then suddenly I started to find that I could do it. And then suddenly I started to find that I liked it. And suddenly I started to find that my body temperature was regulating itself much more easily than previously. So I'd abandoned the hot water bottles. I didn't need so many sweaters on, etc., etc. So I think, you know, what you're saying about that kind of like inner focus, we were in a river that had strong currents. There were times when we had to tie a rope to a tree and hold on to it strongly, you know? We were safe. It was shallow enough to be able to stand up in apart from one midpoint, you know, but still we didn't want to get pulled away. And after that, when I got back to the UK, I've now become a great advocate of cold showers every day or whenever possible, or ice baths. You don't like that. We'll talk about that actually, because I actually found, which surprised me, that the immersion is much easier than the cold shower. And it looks like you agree. Why don't you like cold showers?
It lands on your head for a start. And I think that's the last thing that needs to go in the water. Because that's where all the gubbins are. You know, it just feels wrong to have, and I hate it if somebody splashes me. It's the shock where,
Right.
but I will jump in water. It's strange, but I always have dunked first in the water before I go and run and jump off a jetty or something.
Oh, really? Okay. Okay. So that's what works for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and now we've seen that there's a lot of research happening around the benefits of cold exposure, creating little pockets of hormetic stress that helps us regulate stress in our day-to-day lives. That's certainly been true for me. Has that been true for you, that you find that you regulate stress more?
Not always, because I think sometimes you can react to things and your body is still capable of reacting, but maybe I'm better able to find a way of dealing with that reaction. So, but I'm glad to say that I do react to things. I haven't become a machine. You know, I can't control stress all the time. No. My reactive system is still there, and I think that's really good. I think that's really important.
Yeah. I don't want to imply at all that it's kind of you just become this machine, but I know that for me, because of that focus on my breath, because of that focus on calming and emptying the mind, when stresses come in, I find it much easier to kind of soothe myself or to bring myself into the breath or to use the cold as a way to, and I use heat now as well, sauna exposure. Anyway, just to jump back a little bit, there has been plenty of research done. Maybe we'll link some of those research studies below here. But on this personal level, in your book, you have various characters. So I'd like to ask you about which one you relate the most to and why.
Okay, I had to find a way of working out which 16 people I was going to interview. 16 people because there were only 8 pages of photos in the book, and I felt everybody needed a photo. So I thought about myself, and I thought about how I had to really dig deep through myself. And I had been to see a hypnotherapist at one point, and she had suggested I draw out the characters that her questioning was leading me to think about. And she said, they are all characters, they're your family, they're facets of you. But she wanted me to draw them. So I did, and there were 5. There was the warrior, the mother, the thinker, the child, and the panther. And I think they're very stereotypical archetypes. So that had been a few years prior to having the operation on my legs, but I remembered this, and my daughter suggested that it was a good way to look at other people. You know, do they have those same layers within them, and which one is predominant in them? So I stalked people on Instagram.
You became the panther.
I did. And I was trying to work out, well, what are you? Are you a warrior? You know, what do I say? How do you portray yourself? Because people can hide behind a portrait of themselves. So your question was, which one do you think I am predominantly?
Yeah, and also now, of course, I want to know, kind of did any of those particular interviewees stand out for you? Probably because you related, or sometimes it's the opposite, as in, I don't get that at all.
Well, funnily enough, they all lived up to the box or the label I'd given them, but they all had the characteristics of the other facets as well. But there is always a predominant one in somebody. And yes, they were all accurate, I can safely say. And that was just from a couple of the people I knew already. Other people, I didn't know who they were at all. I had just watched their their antics on Instagram, and I had interacted with them, conversations, video chats, and so on. So I kind of had this idea. I would say that for me, I actually think the mother and the warrior, possibly, because I do like to look after people. I don't particularly like to mother people, but I like to make sure they're okay.
Yeah.
And I'll put other people before me very often and make sure they're okay. And then I know I can get by. I can just deal with myself. I think I've had to call on my warrior a lot at various stages, and I think I'm not particularly an overthinker, although I can be, and that's the thinker. And I do plan things out. I like to be organized. So yeah, they are all in me, but I would say mother and mother
Warrior.
and warrior are the
Well, you
ones.
sound like a warrior.
I think so. I think, yeah, the child, it's all it interacts, but the mother and the warrior probably.
And did any of those interviews in particular stand out? I mean, I'm sure you got a lot from all of them, but did anything particularly stand out because it had resonance for you rather than simply the subject of cold exposure or cold swimming?
Yes, we almost forgot that I was there to talk about, what is it about the cold?
Yeah.
Because I was getting to know them on a very personal, deep level. I actually stayed with 3 of the people, and I'd never met them before in my life. So I had a real insight into their lives, and I met their families and so on. And on occasion, we both burst into tears because we'd really hit a raw nerve, I think, with some of the things we talked about. And at that point, the connection was so much stronger than just the cold water. It ran on a mother talking to other mothers, and that feeling of wanting to care for people, wanting to make sure people were all right, but sometimes just wanting somebody to look after us. And at that point, a couple of my profiles just cried, and I just held them. So they became my child. It was, you could see their child come out, and just this person who was fundamentally really strong and looked after other people, but sometimes just felt they weren't necessarily looked after as much as they needed. So it was very deep, very intense on occasion. Yeah.
I'm really glad you brought that in because I think many of us have these different parts and these different aspects. We're not one thing all the time, as you said before, we don't become machines. We're moved by people, we're moved by situations, we have vulnerabilities, we have strengths, we have capacities we might not even know that we've got until we start doing things like you've done. I can't imagine that you have any plans to stop doing what you're doing.
No, I don't. I think it's become a non-negotiable in my life. I will either sit in my tub, which I have outside my house. It's could be heated by a wood burning stove, but I very rarely do that. It's cold. And I either, I do some turbo training, yoga, and then I sit in the tub, and it's a quiet time. I set my intentions for the day. And then maybe during the day I go, because I want to be out in nature, I'll go and find a waterfall somewhere that fits my mood of that day, or the story I want to tell on Instagram. So I have become obsessed by it. Funny that. No, I don't plan to stop, but I plan to use it kind of to help other people.
Yeah.
Find their own thing that they could do that becomes a non-negotiable and that keeps them safe in life.
Absolutely, absolutely. I've had to find that myself recently after supporting my son through surgery. and I came to draw on the practices and the things I do, and I've definitely found quite a few non-negotiables now. And I love the fact that you said when you get in your tub, you set your intention for the day, because I think that mindset is a huge part of this. So thank you for bringing that in too. On a really superficial note, but also not, what's the furthest place you've ever sat in cold water, or the most exciting one?
Well, I guess the most Norway, I think, has to be up there, and not just because of sitting in a hole cut in a frozen lake, but I think the most exciting one was the night that I was encouraged to walk along the walk of death by the lady I was staying with, who was a panther. And she goes out on this jetty every morning at sunrise. But when it's covered in ice and you have to go from a rock to a rock to a rock onto this wobbly wooden jetty thing sticking out into the fjord, it's a howling gale, there's sleet. And she said, it'll be great, we must go and do it, it'll be fantastic. So of course I went and did it. And we just had our neoprene gloves and booties on and a bobble hat, nothing else. And it was fantastic. We had to climb down this ladder that was wobbling around all over the place, waves slapping at us. And it just was so exciting, and it was so bonding, because we both shouted and screeched and screamed, and it sounds mad, but it was so uninhibited. And I think that was what was so joyous about it. And just to do it with a complete stranger. And then I'd spent the next 2 days kind of talking with her, and we did it again on the same jetty in the morning. There was no wind, it was still icy, but a completely different experience. But we had that really, it was dangerous, I suppose. The water was deep, there was ice floating on it, but it just brings something out in you, this charge of power and electricity. And this, everybody says, I feel alive. And that sounds like a cliche now, but you're alive, and that you want to stay alive and you want to grab life.
Beautiful, beautiful. And if you're listening and you want to try this, please take note that Sarah has just mentioned very much that she was with somebody, that she's got experience. You don't want to go cutting holes in ice all by yourself and putting yourself in extreme situations. But, it's not lost on me that your friend had called it the walk of death, and that you described that feeling of aliveness, because I think when we are confronted with our mortality, that sense of gratitude and appreciation for life is so heightened by the contrast that we experience. And do you have any more places on your bucket list that you would like to cold swim? Yeah.
I'd like to go to Iceland. I'd like to go to northern Norway. I would like to go to Canada, America in winter. Japan has some beautiful places. There's so many places I would love to go, but I'm at my most content if I'm just somewhere special with special people here in the Lake District, I have to say. And that's how I kind of ended my book. The best ice hole I went to was in a tarn here with my son and daughter. We walked up there, and just to be with them, you need to be comfortable in your own skin. It's all very well having all these exciting experiences, but actually to be with your family, people you love, in your home. Home is in you. It's not necessarily some exciting place somewhere else. It's in you. That's where it lives.